Pandora Tomorrow is the hardest of all the mainline Splinter Cell games to play. Not to beat necessarily, just to actually play. Putting handheld and mobile games to one side, Ubisoft sells every Splinter Cell game on its Uplay store except Pandora Tomorrow, and it's not available to download legally anywhere else either. Even if you own the original CD release and a PC that has a CD-ROM drive, you'll likely need to download a separate key crack to play it. Once you have, you'll find that the lighting is balked because it does not play nicely on modern PCs. So you'll need to download a separate patch to get the shadows where they need to be, which is kind of essential in a stealth game like Splinter Cell. And you'll need to download DG Voodoo 2 separately if you want to remove the watermark that comes with the patch. As for console, Pandora Tomorrow is part of the Splinter Cell HD collection that was released on PS3 and Xbox 360. However, not only is that not playable on PS4 or Xbox One, the version of Pandora Tomorrow included in that trilogy is the PC version, complete with that terrible lighting. It's a mess and not how you should experience the game. You can play the original Xbox version on the 360 or Xbox One through backwards compatibility, although that means you'll be playing in 4:3 resolution and in standard definition. All of this is a shame because Pandora Tomorrow deserves to be played instead of being skipped over as if it was the franchise's equivalent to Devil May Cry 2. There are similarities between those two franchises. Both have a solid first entry and an excellent third one that is often recognised as the best of the bunch. However, whereas DMC2 was a huge step down that didn't seem to understand what people loved about the first game, Pandora Tomorrow is much closer to the original Splinter Cell and in many ways it's better. Being the second entry, it's not as memorable as the groundbreaking original or the excellent Chaos Theory that came after it, but it does have a load of cool locations, a solid story and a bunch of quality of life improvements over the first game. I really hope Ubisoft gets around to selling this game again one day, ideally with some fixes, because even when it's fully patched up, Pandora Tomorrow does have that feeling of a game released sort of 6 months too early. This video has been a long time coming. When I made my video on the first Splinter Cell 6 months ago, the plan was to cover one of these games every month, so I'd be finished by now instead of just getting around to the first sequel. My failure to stick to my own self-imposed deadlines is partly due to life stuff and perhaps underestimating the time required to make the Witcher videos, but it was also because I wasn't looking forward to playing Pandora Tomorrow. Beyond the hassle of getting the damn thing to run, I played Pandora Tomorrow back when it was released on PS2 and I didn't love it. I didn't hate it either, and I would always tell people it was good when asked about it, but my heart wasn't in the recommendation, and I'd never go into more detail. I only played it once, a far cry from the multiple runs I did on the original, and something about it didn't feel right, although I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. I now know that Pandora Tomorrow was made by Ubisoft Shanghai instead of Ubisoft Montreal, who did the first game, with Shanghai just handling the PS2 port. Montreal had an extra year to develop Chaos Theory, so Ubisoft Shanghai probably had around 18 months for Pandora Tomorrow. Up until Ubisoft gave it this Splinter Cell sequel, Ubisoft Shanghai had mainly been tasked with ports and not creating its own games. The new development team didn't quite get to grips with level design in the same way as Ubisoft Montreal, which I'll discuss more later, and ultimately that is why Pandora Tomorrow feels a little off. However, Ubisoft Shanghai also made a bunch of minor changes to the core gameplay, which are largely positive. Fisher now doesn't carry health packs and instead relies on finding health stations around the levels. There aren't all that many and some are in out of the way locations, so this encourages additional exploration and stops you stockpiling a bunch of health packs, which previously made it way too easy to recover from any gunfights you might have stumbled into. Hiding bodies is now easier thanks to a flashing indicator that tells you when you can drop a body and have it be considered hidden from enemy view, plus you can open doors while carrying a body. I also like how Sam can now whistle to lure enemies over. This comes with its own set of problems, mind you, but it's good to have the ability to reliably make a noise that isn't a gunshot. One of my gripes from the first game was Fisher's complete inability to reliably hit a barn door with a proverbial banjo, and while this is still a problem, there is a big improvement with the red laser mode for the pistol that shows exactly where you will hit. There is still a bunch of weapon sway though, and enemies can see the red light, so it has suitable drawbacks. When not using this laser mode, the accuracy seems about the same as before, which means you're as likely to hit the target as a drunk stormtrooper. This problem is replicated with Fisher's fancy rifle, although this also has an alternate fire mode, in this case a 6x zoom, which seems to hit exactly where you're aiming. This does lead to the slightly silly circumstance where you end up whipping out what is basically a sniper rifle to shoot out a light bulb a foot in front of you. It is kind of ridiculous. Fisher is also a little more athletic now. He can perform a squat turn to move between gaps undetected, shoot while hanging from a wire, and do a half split jump that lets him reach new areas. Unfortunately, you rarely need to use any of these moves. I never once shot while hanging, and in fact there aren't many chances to hang at all. You usually zip wire across instead. I did the squat turn a few times, but only because I thought it looked cool. And as with the first game, the split jump is largely there for show and for a couple of scripted moments. It might be Fisher's most infamous move, but I didn't find one good opportunity to use it to avoid enemies. The approach to storytelling is much the same as before. Once again, there aren't many cutscenes to speak of except at the start. The story is delivered mainly through text at the beginning and end of missions, plus snippets of news broadcasts depicting events around the world that are tangentially related to Fisher's activities. The story in Pandora Tomorrow is solid, but certainly not spectacular. That said, I prefer the story here to that of the original because it's simpler. The story of the first game bounced around between Georgia, Russia and Myanmar, with a strong dose of Chinese involvement for good measure. I wouldn't say it was inherently all that complicated, it was just too much given the storytelling methodology used. A few radio communications and mission debriefings aren't the easiest way to follow a story with so many different factions. Pandora Tomorrow takes place 16 months after the events of Splinter Cell. Sam is thrown into action after a terrorist called Sidono orchestrates a suicide bombing on a US embassy in East Timor. US forces are in the region to support the local population in a war against Indonesian militia groups, one of which is the Darah Dandoa led by Sidono. Sidono's group takes hostages including Douglas Shetland, a friend of Fisher's, and Ingrid Carlson, a translator. Fisher rescues Shetland and Ingrid Carlson helps translate a message that uncovers a link between a figure known only as Mortified Penguin and a cryogenics lab in France. The cryogenics lab stores human brains for dead rich people to effectively put themselves on ice and presumably be resurrected when the technology one day exists to do that. Mortified Penguin sent soldiers to the lab to kill the scientists and steal the ND-133 containers that were used to store the brains. Fisher tracks Mortified Penguin to a train heading to Nice where he identifies the mystery assailant as Norman Soth, who claims to be working undercover for the CIA. It's immediately apparent Soth is lying, but Lambert instructs Fisher to listen in on his call before doing anything further. Soth then sets his men on Fisher, forcing him to make a hasty exit, but not before discovering that Soth is heading to Jerusalem to get something for Sidono's insurance policy. In Jerusalem, Sam meets up with Dahlia Tal, herself an undercover agent for Shin Bet, which is the Israeli equivalent of the NSA, so she plays a similar role to Sam. Tal informs Fisher that Soth is here to purchase a bioweapon from a Syrian group. Fisher obtains a sample of the bioweapon, which Third Echelon identifies as a strain of the smallpox virus. The virus has been placed in the ND-133 containers and spread around the United States. This is Sidono's insurance policy. With the containers in place, the Darah Dandoa gives the US an ultimatum. Pull out of East Timor or the smallpox virus will be released. Killing Sidono isn't an option because the virus will also be released if he doesn't check in every 24 hours with the code word Pandora Tomorrow. The US has no choice and it withdraws its troops. Fisher teams up with Douglas Shetland to infiltrate Sidono's camp in Indonesia. Fisher reaches Sidono's office and taps the phone, which then leads him to a submarine, which in turn has the locations of the ND-133 containers. With this information, Third Echelon tracks down all but one of the containers and is ready to go after Sidono himself. Sidono hunkers down in a TV station where he prepares to make a bunch of videos which will be released at timely intervals to make it look like he's still a big deal and not hiding in a cave somewhere. Fisher takes Sidono alive and he reveals that Soth has the final smallpox virus and plans to release it in Los Angeles airport. Soth turned against the US after being abandoned as the US switched allegiances from Indonesia, who Soth was working with, to East Timor. Fisher tracks down Soth and the final smallpox virus, which he then casually dumps out in the open for the bomb squad to deal with. It's a solid enough story and feels appropriately Tom Clancy-esque, with Fisher and the Third Echelon working in the shadows to track down a bomb threat and save the day for absolutely no thanks. Sidono is an okay villain, and I do like how he was tied to Soth through Soth's work training the Indonesian army before the US switched allegiances. Neither Soth nor Sidono are all that fleshed out though. Fisher himself is a lot funnier this time around and makes a bunch of loaded political jokes that probably wouldn't fly in modern Ubisoft games. He goes as far to suggest that perhaps the US isn't as innocent as it likes to pretend, and he even makes jokes about religions in Jerusalem.
What do you think?
The world is small, nasty, and complicated, and everybody dies alone.
What do you think about Norman Soth?
He's small, nasty, and complicated. I guess how he'll die is up to him.
Red herrings. Nobody knows whether he's a U.S. agent or a terrorist.
Those things aren't mutually exclusive.
Can't be. Until
Here's a cultural opportunity for you. The birthplace of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
So this is where all that peace and love came from.
He has a child's idea of war. Can't tell the difference between a citizen and a soldier. He thinks the whole world is a morally viable target.
There's only one nation on the planet fighting the whole world.
Huh. Whose side are you on?
It probably says a lot about modern games that I found these fairly mundane comments to be quite shocking. I was also a touch surprised to see that Fisher's daughter only gets an offhand mention, given that we know she ends up playing a much bigger role in the series soon. Speaking of which, those news broadcasts between levels are not that crucial for this game, but they do mention things like the Japanese ISDF, which is teasing events of future games. A fair few peripheral characters are introduced briefly in ways that often feel unnecessary. I'd rather get more attached to a small group of people than be constantly introduced to new ones. For example, we already have Grimsdottir working with Lambert as a voice in Fisher's ear. Did we really need Brunton added in as well? It just means Grimsdottir gets pushed more to the periphery. I'd likely feel the same about the unnecessary addition of Douglas Shetland as well, but I suspect he was here specifically to set him up for later titles. Ingrid pops up twice, early on at the embassy and then later on in the TV station, where she is posing, unconvincingly in my opinion, as a friend of Sedona. Perhaps it's due to the storytelling style on offer, but replaying these games I constantly feel like I've jumped in at the end of the series and not the beginning. Shetland is mentioned as a friend of Fisher's, but we aren't given much info on how they know each other. It's like the player is always out of the loop. This never bothered me much back in the day, possibly because video games, especially on console, were not so adept at telling stories as they are now, and cutscenes were used a lot less. Voice acting is a big letdown this time. Lambert's voice actor Don Jordan was replaced by Dennis Haysbert for this game only, and while Haysbert is a good voice actor, his distinctive voice is both a blessing and a curse. It's hard not to hear President Palmer and the guy from the Allstate adverts when you listen to Lambert speak.
the NSA just called me. We have a problem in East Timor.
What kind of problem?
A big one.
This wouldn't have been such a big deal in 2004, but with Jordan returning for all subsequent games, it means you're kind of used to one voice for Lambert, and the change in this one stands out. Outside of the main cast, the voice acting can be painfully bad. There's no attempt at regional accents for a start, although they do seem to make a joke of this in the French level.
How long do you think it'll take to find the Frenchman?
What do you mean, Frenchman? We're all Frenchmen here.
I mean the Frenchman.
This is understandable when you consider the change of developer. It's not a stretch to imagine that Ubisoft Shanghai didn't have quite the same resources or time to sort out regional voice actors. The lack of appropriate accents is a shame, because otherwise the levels do a great job transporting you around the world with varied and interesting locations. Mind you, things start off on a bit of a bland note with the first level where you infiltrate a US embassy. That said, most of it's a tutorial for Sam's basic moveset, and it's at least more interesting than the assault course used in the first game. Once out of the embassy, the sense of spectacle increases significantly. We have the cryogenic lab in Paris, complete with brains casually strewn about all over the floor, and then the excellent train level to hunt down Soth. The train level is by far the most restrictive of them all, but at least it's understandably so in this case. If any level is going to be linear, it's one where you move up and down a train. The level starts with a flourish as Sam leaps onto the train roof and sneaks inside, going through, under and around various carriages. It still looks good now, although I must admit hanging onto the side of a train and nearly falling off has lost some of its appeal, having played the Uncharted games more times than I care to count. You also get to use your thermal vision to identify Soth by his fake leg and listen in on his phone call with your listening device. The Jerusalem mission sees you exploring the city at street level, with occasional detours to the roofs when you can. While it looks great, the level ended up being a little underwhelming. There's a strict no-kill order, most civilians are at home due to the curfew, which makes the whole place feel more lifeless than it should, and a third of the level is a tailing mission, with another third being in a sewer. However, between the tailing mission and the sewer is an incredible moment that really sticks in the memory. You met up with Dahlia Tal and she led you to this lift. Just as the doors are closing, Lambert pops up on the radio and tells you to kill her.
You want to come inside?
Not on your life.
Fisher, we need Dahlia Tal dead. Kill her. Don't think, just do it.
There's no time for an explanation. The lift is about to go down. You have a couple of seconds to decide whether you kill the woman who just helped you navigate the streets of Jerusalem. Whatever you decide, the conversation on the way down in the lift is tense. Fisher is either pissed at being forced to kill an unarmed woman without explanation, or Lambert is annoyed at Fisher for not following orders. As you soon discover, Dahlia Tal only helped Fisher because she wanted him to get the bioweapon, which she then planned to steal from him. If you left her alive, she tries to kill you at the end of the level, along with a couple of other snipers. As consequences go, it's not a huge one. Dealing with the snipers is no harder than getting past the cops guarding the exit if you do kill her. Still, it's a great scene to include, not to encourage repeat playthroughs necessarily, but to get you thinking a bit about the type of person Fisher is to you, the player, and how far he will go to follow orders. The level in the Indonesian jungle where you track down Sedono and then make your way to the sub is notable for the switch away from confined spaces, whether they be hallways or narrow streets, and into long green grass that hides tripwires and takes place during partial daylight. The sub itself is probably the worst level. There was a sub level in the DLC for Splinter Cell and frankly that was better than this one, although fortunately your time in the sub is limited. Breaking into the TV station is fairly epic and probably my favourite level. You start by navigating the city streets, dealing with a thunderstorm, make your way underground and then above ground and up onto the roofs before rappelling into the station. Once inside you get Ingrid to help you past a bunch of retinal scans, although her cover is blown halfway through and you have to shoot your way out. You then get to sneak around a recording studio and take Sedono hostage while he is recording videos for his followers. Finally, there's a decent level in LAX where you have to kill the terrorists who you identify by using your thermal vision. The terrorists have all had a recent smallpox injection to protect them against the virus, so they are running a little hot compared to all the innocent people. I found the requirement to kill enemies much more interesting than the requirement not to kill them, because trying to do so while innocent people don't notice actually adds a significant challenge. Nearly every level has something to remember it by, and I suspect everyone has a different personal favourite. Compare that to the first game, which largely consisted of embassies and office buildings, plus locations like oil rigs and nuclear power plants that aren't exactly all that exciting. Pandora Tomorrow doesn't have any dead weight, and as such you never get bored with the environments. Unfortunately, while the levels are memorable due to their scale and scenery, the actual encounter design is pretty lackluster. This problem appears to be down to a talent shortage of level designers in China at the time. In an interview with Tech in Asia, Corinne Leroy, head of Ubisoft Shanghai, states that while the team was incredibly talented and hard-working, the lack of experience in crafting their own games meant there was a shortage of level designers due to most local game development at the time being centred around porting games designed by other developers. I don't want to specifically state what the developers were trying to do because obviously I don't know and wouldn't want to put words in their mouths. What I can say is how the levels felt like they were designed. I'm convinced each level and even each room and encounter within each level was designed with a specific approach in mind. A no kill, no detection stealth route that made Sam look like a complete badass when he pulled it off, and hopefully made the player feel the same way. This is not to say you don't ever have any choice about what to do, it's just that whatever else you do will likely be inferior to what Ubisoft Shanghai had in mind. Doing no kill, no detection runs in stealth games is often the goal, albeit sometimes a self-imposed one, but the good games make you feel like you have found your own way of doing it with the tools the game gave you. In Pandora Tomorrow you feel like you just found the one correct solution. To be clear, I'm not asking for Pandora Tomorrow to be something it isn't, nor am I saying that linearity is inherently a bad idea. The early Splinter Cell games were going for a Mission Impossible vibe, and when it works, it really works. That's how you get moments like clinging onto the side of a train or rappelling down into a TV station. The problem comes when the specific routes or ideas the developer has in mind aren't well communicated to the player, because you end up getting either a lot of trial and error or, more likely, the player taking the route of least resistance. It's also a terrible fit for a game with shockingly inconsistent enemy AI. For me, this meant my first playthrough was frustrating and disappointing, either requiring me to keep replaying the same sections again and again until I got the result I wanted, or feeling more like Johnny English than James Bond as I stumbled my way through. The first half of the Paris level is a great example because you can absolutely ghost through that like a pro, and if you do, you'll probably love the game. However, on a first playthrough you'll likely be confused as to what the game expects of you and end up doing the same thing again and again, namely luring enemies into the darkness, killing them, hiding the body and moving on. A good playthrough might look a bit like this. You approach the end of the first tunnel and see an enemy blocking the way forward. Conveniently you have a can to throw as a distraction and another one nearby to make it to the ladder and on top of the train undetected. You approach the next two guards and listen to their conversation and then move down to the tracks just before the enemy looks around at you. Moving on, you reach the next room and use your optic cable to see that an enemy is patrolling. Waiting for him to move away, you open a door, crawl around the shelves and sneak through the gap when he heads to the other side of the room. Or you can climb up on the bookshelves. In the next room you can turn out the lights and sneak to the exit while the goons investigate. 3 guards burst into the next room shortly after you enter, but you stick to the side where it's dark and again get past undetected. After this the level starts to open up a bit and isn't quite so obviously rigid in what it expects of you, although you can still see examples of how the developer expects you to play. For example, in this room you're supposed to trigger the phone on the wall to ring as you walk past it, and if you do it's a fairly tense and scary moment. But it only works if you approach this room in a very specific way. The game doesn't have a backup plan in mind for triggering the phone if you don't enter the room exactly as it envisions you will. Now let's see how things are more likely to play out when you do this level the first time. Remember, this is only the second level of the game, so you're likely still adjusting. That first encounter is in a lit area, so the first thing you'll probably do is shoot out the light. This makes the enemy investigate, at which point it's easy enough to shoot him in the head or just run up and knock him out. It's already dark, so there's no need to hide the body. You then approach the 2 enemies talking, except you won't know their routes. The logical thing is to hide near the edge of the train, and you probably wouldn't expect one guard to enter and turn left to look straight back where he just was. You also won't expect to be hidden in this position because he should spot you. Again, it's much safer to just kill them both. Then there's the room with the shelves. The problem with the perfect route through here is that you're relying on a level of consistency with the AI that just doesn't exist. I found that even when the enemy was at the other end of the room, he would still hear me open the door and come to investigate. Not always, but sometimes. If he did, I might as well just kill him instead of doing the fancy stuff. Climbing through shelves or on the bookcase means you need to shoot out the lights, and shooting out the lights again means that the enemy might maybe hear you. Most people will be able to sneak around the next room without too many problems. In the open room where the enemies rush in, you will likely be caught by surprise and keep to the left because it doesn't look like the area on the right provides enough shadow, or that you'd be able to get there in time. Whenever I did stay behind this cover on the left, enemies would always spot me moving, although strangely they wouldn't really investigate properly. Conversely, if you do go to the right, an enemy won't spot you even though he gets incredibly close and looks right at you. In other circumstances this kind of thing doesn't work, so you've no way of knowing you'll actually get away with this. These issues with encounter design are repeated throughout the game. Quite often on that first playthrough I'd be looking for an optimal route and would somehow attract the attention of a nearby guard, who would then come over and practically walk into my fist. You soon realise that this is always the easiest way to progress. The path of least resistance through a level is to fail. If you mess up in some way you'll attract attention, and this offers you an easy out. Failure is rarely punishing unless you also fail to take the enemies out quickly enough, which might result in an alarm. But generally, messing up whatever it is you were trying to do makes your life a lot easier, not harder. Once you've realised how easy it is to take enemies out, you start to lure them in with a whistle, and at this point all the challenge is gone. The ability to whistle is a good addition because it's only sensible to let the player make a noise, but you need to have enemies and levels that are designed in such a way that it isn't basically a win button. Bigger rooms with more enemies might have helped. Going back to that early Paris level again, you have the room with just one guard, and no matter what you do here you won't attract the attention of guards from the next room, so there's simply no risk. At least in the room that is rushed by 3 enemies there's a good chance you will die if you are spotted. Later levels are a little better because there are more open areas which can be packed with extra enemies, but you'd be amazed how rarely enemies in the same open space actually notice what's going on. And they seem to be fixed to very specific areas that they won't leave. I guess the more freedom enemies have to move around, the more you risk breaking the specific way the developer clearly wants you to play the game. There are encounters that even after a couple of playthroughs and looking at video walkthroughs and guides, I'm still not entirely sure what the developer wanted from the player. Take this room on the first level for example. You can't kill the enemies, and you need to make it around the corner at the far end where there's a door to the next room. Getting to the exit here isn't at all difficult, because even if the enemies spot you, they don't shoot all that quickly or do much damage, and they seemingly won't follow you once you go through the door. Now, I didn't really want to do that because it felt like cheating, but I have no idea what the alternative is. The best way I found, and it's replicated in a few speedruns and walkthroughs I've seen, is to quickly blow out some of the lights and lean against this wall, taking advantage of the enemy's inability to see you just because you're pressed against the wall. This still felt cheap. They practically clipped through me. However, everything else I tried resulted in me either getting spotted and shot at or hunted down until I had no choice but to take people out. I could specifically only get past this area by making a noise to throw the enemy AI into a new routine. I wasn't so much a ghost as a clumsy child. There's also this section in the Jerusalem level where you have to start following Dahlia. I have absolutely no idea how you're supposed to get past a police officer and the members of the public and remain undetected. On this one it seems like I might have had bad luck with enemy placement because I've seen people online have the members of the public be elsewhere. This section perfectly illustrates the problem though, because on my first playthrough I messed up here when trying to shoot out a light. I caused a bit of a panic, which meant the people who were blocking my way went to run and hide, and I was able to get past. On my second playthrough, when I was trying to be a lot more careful, I couldn't for the life of me find a way past. I ended up shooting a bullet in the air again. Like I said, you need to fail to succeed. Pandora Tomorrow only manages to up the challenge by placing a bunch of restrictions on you, such as automatically failing you if you're spotted, or not being able to kill anyone. The no-kill rule is generally okay when it involves citizens or police officers, but it is also enforced in some bizarre places, such as inside the enemy submarine. You're allowed to kill the exact same enemies in the level up until you enter the sub, and even one that comes out of the sub just before you enter, but once inside you're suddenly not allowed. The reason is almost certainly that the narrow corridors would make the whole thing painfully easy if you could kill them, but that makes it a solution to a problem they've created themselves. I wish I could explain what was going on with the enemy AI. I have a bunch of notes referring to times I was spotted with no explanation, and looking back at the footage I can't figure it out. There are times when I'm not moving at all and neither is the enemy. He'll continue to look in the same direction and then suddenly he notices me. It's absolutely bizarre.
Who's this? He's armed! What?
On some occasions it seems like the reaction is just delayed, as if the enemy saw you earlier but has to continue to run through the set routine he's acting out before reacting to seeing you.
There's nothing here. There's something over there.
There are situations that are so restricted you'd think they'd play out the same way each time, and yet somehow they don't. Take that level on the train. I'm pretty sure you have to end up in this small room to unlock the train doors, at which point you have to leave and turn left. You can shut the lights on the way, but otherwise this whole part is completely fixed. Yet somehow, despite doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, I would somehow get spotted about every other attempt. The inconsistency is also noticeable in the alarm system, which now displays exactly what level of alarm status you're at, which is a welcome addition from the first game. Enemies will sometimes raise an alarm immediately after seeing you, even if you kill them or knock them out a split second later, but other times there's a significant gap where it looks like they need to specifically call in to register an alarm, which is how it should be. There's also weird stuff, like if a turret starts shooting at you, no one seems to care. You think the noise of a turret firing at someone would be enough to get an alarm raised, but guards will go about their business as if nothing had happened. However, if you sneak up to the turret and change it so that it shoots at enemies, they will somehow have time to set off an alarm despite being riddled with bullets.
He got a lucky picture of a penguin with his cell phone, was wounded, and locked himself inside body processing.
Speaking of alarm levels, I have absolutely no idea how the game determines whether a body is properly hidden. As with the original, the game checks at regular intervals to see if you've left any bodies lying around for other enemies to find, and if you have, the alarm level is raised. I mentioned earlier how the game now tells you when you're in a spot where a body can be hidden without being detected, but this is no way 100% reliable. I was incredibly careful to hide bodies properly and would still see the alarm get raised and have Lambert chastise me about being more careful to hide bodies. My only workable theory is that the flashing indicator is not telling you you're in a safe spot to dump a body, but that the body is currently in a safe spot. The difference being that as Fisher places the body down, it obviously ends up lower to the ground and in a slightly different position to when he's carrying it. If this is what's happening, then it's stupid. If the game really wanted you to hide bodies, it would be nice if it gave you proper places to hide them, such as the lockers that are in many levels. These could be the official no-risk hiding spots that take more effort to get to but are guaranteed to be safe. This system is most annoying in the levels with long grass or in the sewers with high water. Regardless of how high the grass or water is, the status of a body being considered hidden or not is entirely determined by the lighting in the area. The fact that the body is under 3 foot high grass is deemed irrelevant. This seems like a shocking waste of an otherwise cool environmental feature. It's a shame because the alarm level setup is otherwise a good feature. If you raise 1 alarm, enemies will be instructed to wear flak jackets, which makes your job slightly harder, and 2 alarms means they will wear helmets, which makes it a lot harder. Both changes directly counter a careless, guns first approach and encourage you to take things slow and stay in the shadows, albeit there's still no real drawback to the whole luring enemies over at one time approach. A 3rd alarm means the mission is over, but the alarms reset if you stay hidden for long enough. If the system for being detected and having bodies found was in any way reliable, it would be good. Oh well. Another slight disappointment is how Pandora Tomorrow introduces cool new ideas which it then fails to do anything with. In the tutorial, you're taught how to avoid enemies wearing night vision goggles by actually staying in the light as opposed to avoiding it. I never did it again. And then there's the whole interrogation thing, which, as in the first game, is introduced as if it's a big deal before being largely abandoned. The only place I found to interrogate anyone was getting the submarine raised, and that was entirely scripted. I'm not sure where to draw the line between bugs and just bad design, but moments where enemies got stuck walking on the spot are presumably not deliberate, and I don't think luggage is supposed to travel through walls like this. The major annoyance was the tendency of conversations to just not start, such as when Lambert is supposed to tell you to keep this guy hostage for a bit so that he can give the all clear, only for it not to happen at all on a different playthrough. Likewise, some of the conversations Dahlia has with guards are muted, leaving you staring at 2 people talking but not hearing anything. Or she has the conversation in the wrong spot, so she's attacking a guard and he's seemingly taking damage when they're spaced quite far apart.
I'll escort you. These streets aren't safe, curfew or no. I'll walk you home to make sure you arrive quickly.
That's not necessary.
I also had trouble recording a conversation where Sedona spills the code to access his villa. It worked smoothly enough on my first run, but second time around enemies either spotted me or the camera during the conversation, and it took about 4 attempts to get the conversation to play out as it should. You specifically have to get the code from this conversation because the doors won't open otherwise, even if you've remembered the code or gotten it from a guide. So yeah, Pandora Tomorrow certainly has issues, and had it released a few years later on the next console generation, it would likely have been patched a few times to fix the worst offences. That said, it's no worse than, well, the majority of games that release these days, so it shouldn't put Ubisoft off selling it on Uplay. If it can sell Ghost Recon Breakpoint, it can sell Pandora Tomorrow. I can't claim Pandora Tomorrow is a hidden must-play or anything. Story-wise, you won't miss much by skipping this one, and it feels similar enough to the first that it's not a new experience. Pandora Tomorrow is perhaps best described as a step sideways. Some things are better, such as the variety of locations, gameplay tweaks, and maybe the story, but the level design took a step back and the game is a lot rougher around the edges. Still, if you like the Splinter Cell games, I would encourage you to seek this one out if you can. It's not quite the runt of the litter that I remembered it as being. Alright, that's it from me today. Please consider hitting like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments. Given that I initially disliked Pandora Tomorrow and then ended up quite enjoying it, I'm guessing there will be quite a variety of opinions on this one. I do have a Patreon as well if you'd like to support the channel. $1 a month gets your name in the credits and a Patreon role in my Discord server, which is open to all. This will presumably be my last video of the year. 2020 will mark the return of the History of Isometric CRPG series and the conclusion of the Witcher critiques, along with more Splinter Cell retrospectives and plenty of other stuff. Okay, until next time, cheers.